Welcome to Trending News. Book, Cold Cases, Famous Unsolved Mysteries, Crimes, and Disappearances in America. Episode 1, Part 2. The Cigar Girl, The Death of Mary Roger, 1841. Search for Mary Roger. 2 days after Rogers disappeared on July 25, 1841, Payne continued to search for his fiancée, E. He heard that a young woman matching Rogers's description had been seen at a pub for several hours on the day that she disappeared. He spoke to the keeper of the pub, but was no closer to finding her. After finding no trace of her during a second trip to Hoboken, he returned to the city in early afternoon. Payne went to the shop where he worked as a cork cutter and went home at 7 p.m. The next morning Crommelin joined the search. He had lived at the Rogers boarding house from December 7, 1840, until June 1841. He moved out after Rogers rejected him in favor of his fellow boarder Payne. Just before she disappeared, Rogers left a rose in the keyhole of Crommelin's office door. Although he found out on Monday that Rogers hadn't returned home, he didn't start looking for her until he saw the newspaper advertisement about her disappearance on Wednesday. He spoke to Phoebe to confirm her daughter's disappearance. Crommelin then joined the search with his friend Padley, who had also once roomed at the Rogers boarding house. They took one of the steamboats that frequently crossed the Hudson River from New York City to Hoboken. After disembarking near a hotel and tavern, it was a short walk to the Elysian Fields, a scenic spot of about 4 or 5 acres that was surrounded on 3 sides by trees and looked towards the river on the 4th side. In the 1840s it was a popular spot for city dwellers to get away to the country. It was also home to a popular refreshment house, known as Nick Moore's house. One that sweltering afternoon of July 28, 1841, James Bullard and Henry Mallon were walking along the shore near a part of Hoboken known as Sybil's Cave. As they looked out across the Hudson River, one of the men spotted a body floating in the water about 200 or 300 yards from where they were standing. Bullard and Mallon raced to the Elysian Fields dock, jumped into a boat, and rowed quickly towards it. As they got closer, they realized it was the fully dressed body of a young woman. They tried several times unsuccessfully to fish the body out of the river, and finally they tied a rope around the dead woman and dragged her back to shore behind the boat. At the same time, John Bertram, William Waller, and a man named Luther spotted what they initially thought were clothes as they cruised by in their sailboat. By the time Bullard and Mallon had reached the shore with their cargo, a crowd had gathered. The men laid the woman's body down on the beach. As people pressed forward to gawk, Crommelin, who had joined the growing crowd, leaned forward and realized he was staring at the body of Mary Rogers. She was still wearing the same clothes that she had put on 3 days earlier, a flowered bonnet, blue dress, petticoat, pantalettes, stockings, and garters. But her face was badly beaten. She had strips of lace from her petticoat tied around her neck in a sailor's knot, and her body was bruised and waterlogged. Rogers's body was transported from the beach to the village of Hoboken, where County Coroner Drive. Richard F. Cook performed an autopsy. He concluded that the beautiful cigar girl had been beaten, gagged, strangled, and raped perhaps repeatedly, before being thrown into the Hudson River. He also said that her face was swollen and that there was a mark about the size and shape of a man's thumb on the right side of her neck and 2 or 3 marks on the left side that resembled the shape of a man's fingers. Marks appeared to indicate that her wrists had been tied together and her dress was torn. Blood was still seeping from her mouth. There were no signs that Rogers was pregnant. Crommelin identified the body and stayed with it until the coroner had completed his investigation. By then it was nearly 9 p.m. and the ferries had stopped operating for the day. Crommelin stayed at the Jersey City Hotel and returned to New York City in the morning, bringing news of Rogers's death and some pieces of her clothing, including flowers from her hat, a garter, the bottom of her pantalette, and a curl of her hair. Phoebe Rogers confirmed they belonged to her daughter. A grieving Phoebe closed up her boarding house and moved in with her sister.